Hey, you guys. Welcome back to the salon. So, on today's installment, at the very excellent recommendation of a listener, I'm going to discuss 10 of the horror movie scenes that I personally found the scariest or that made the biggest impact on me the first time I saw them. Like, these were all scenes that sort of lingered uncomfortably in my memory for years after I first saw the movies. Some of these choices may be idiosyncratic, to say the least. I honestly have no idea why certain things in movies freak me out and other things don't bother me at all. So please don't ask me to explain why. Please don't ask me to expound further upon it or chastise me for picking scenes that, oh my God, Jenny, that's not even scary. Like, scary is subjective, and I have particular things that like scare me in movies that maybe don't scare you, and vice versa. So these are just 10 that I thought of, and there's millions of other ones as well too. Now, one thing that I wanted to do with this, it's like I wanted to try to avoid choosing scenes from films that I've already discussed at length, like on this channel or over on one of my other YouTube channels. I just like to keep a bit of variety in the content. I don't like to be kind of just talking about the same movies over and over again because I don't know, I just kind of feel like it'd be too repetitive. For example, some of the scariest scenes to me, like in horror movies, appeared in movies like The Haunting from 1963, The Tenant, Stir of Echoes, Burnt Offerings, The Shining, and Don't Look Now, but I've already talked about those movies elsewhere, like in slightly different contexts, like usually quite at length, So I don't want to really be rehashing all the same things. So just kind of like know that these ones aren't necessarily like the scariest scenes to me like ever, but these are scary scenes that are in movies that I don't think I've really talked about that much previously. That said, though, I'm sure I will probably eventually do a part 2 of this, maybe more. I don't know, I can't promise anything, but I mean, there are like tons of scenes that I had to leave off. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into the list, and this is in no particular order. So the scene I want to talk about first, this was a no-brainer for me. This was pretty much the first one that popped into my head when I decided to do this video. I've always said, to myself mostly, that many of the scariest scenes in film don't even come from what would normally be considered horror films, or come from horror films and aren't usually considered like the scariest scenes from those horror films, you know what I mean? Now, for a long time, I thought I was pretty much alone in this opinion, but one day I was like scrolling through, because I get kind of interested in various different publications, like scariest horror scenes of all time, and like some of them are good picks, some of them it's like, oh yeah, I see, that is really scary, and some of them it's just kind of like, okay, I don't really get it, but whatever. But this one list, I read this a while back, but I think it was done by Retro Crush, and they had done this list that was 100 scariest movie scenes, and this scene right here was number 1, and I was like, sweet vindication, thank you, I'm not the only, because prior to that, I thought that I was the only person in the world that thought this was like one of the scariest scenes in any movie ever. So this scene, obviously, Winky's fucking diner. So if you have not seen Mulholland Drive, what the hell is even the matter with you? I'm a big David Lynch fan, and all of his movies are good, but Mulholland Drive is, I think, like his masterpiece. I've seen it a bunch of times. I've read entire websites like breaking it down and like explaining it and shit like that. It's an amazing, amazing movie. So the diner scene actually happens really short, like a really short time into the movie. I think it's like maybe in the first 5 minutes or something like that. So the setup of this scene is just so mundane. You got these two minor characters named Dan and Herb, who really seem to have nothing to do with the movie as a whole and barely appear in the movie again. So I kind of feel like Mulholland Drive is one of those movies where I kind of feel like people watch it and we're like, what the fuck was that all about? Like, those guys aren't even in the movie, or they're not even characters. But I almost kind of feel like the Winky's diner scene is almost kind of like a microcosm of the whole entire plot, if that doesn't sound too pretentious to say, but I think it's almost kind of like the movie's mission statement, which is I think why it happens like so early on in the film. So yeah, so it's these two characters who seem to have nothing to do with any of the other characters in the movie that we're going to meet subsequently. So they're sitting in Winky's diner. It's broad daylight, like it's in the middle of the day. There's other people in the diner. It's still, like I said, totally mundane. Dan is telling Herb about a recurring dream he's had that took place in the very diner that they're sitting in. And you're not really sure if these two guys are friends. I kind of got a more patient therapist type vibe, but they don't really kind of go into that. So he's like, yeah, I keep having this dream and it's set in this Winky's, and that's why I asked you to meet me at this particular one, because that's like all the nightmares or the dreams that I'm having are set in this one. And it all sounds fairly humdrum, like what he's talking about, until Dan says, there's a man behind the diner. And then he says, he's the one who's doing it. Now, Dan doesn't really elaborate on what it might be or what he's talking about. But then he says something like, I can see him through the wall. And he tells Herb then, he's like, I hope I never see that face outside of a dream, with the implication being that the face is just too horrible for him to describe. Now, while Dan is talking, he looks kind of sweaty and very like apprehensive and intense, and he's kind of talking very haltingly. Now, later on in the scene, very famously, Herb is just kind of like, well, I'll show you that there's nothing back there, like that these dreams like don't mean anything. So he takes him out back to show him that there's no man behind the diner. Yeah, that doesn't go so well. That whole fucking scene, it just doesn't. Ugh, I'm just like fucking. This scene, listen, I don't know why. It just gives you the fucking heebie-jeebies. But what is it about this? And I've asked myself this like a million times, because I've seen this movie like so many times, and this scene, even when I know that's coming, it still like freaks me out. So every single time I watch it, it like gives me the fucking, the horrors, and I'm not really sure why. I can't put my finger on it. Now, it isn't the most, because I kind of feel like when people talk about this being, the scariest scene ever or whatever, I kind of feel like most people are talking about the nightmare man, which is actually a woman, which that's a whole other thing. But the scary face, like the hobo or whatever, like popping out from behind the dumpster, like it's I don't want to call it a jump scare because it's not like blah, you know what I mean? But it is like a little bit of a jump scare. I kind of feel like most people are talking about that, and I'm talking about that a little bit, but that's not really what makes the scene scary for me. Like that's like when that face pops out, it's pretty frightening. Like, obviously the bomb or whatever, it's like looks terrifying. And that is very frightening in a jump out of your seat, like I said, like jump scare kind of way. But it's not particularly like dread inducing in the sense of something that would linger with you. The scariest part of this scene for me is everything leading up to that. You know what I mean? Just the whole discussion that they're having, just because there's no context to it and you're not entirely like sure what they're talking about. And it's just like a little bit, like I said, it's mundane, but it's also like tinged with the surreal. And it's just this, there's something very sinister about it, but you can't put your finger on why it's sinister. And that like makes me really uncomfortable. So, I mean, the way that Dan is talking, like it's almost kind of like the close-up is just a little too close, and he just seems very intense, and he has like these kind of weird, like rubbery expressions. His eyes are just like maybe slightly too big. And there's just kind of like, he has like this very nervous affect. The way the camera kind of like floats around the men, which if I actually never noticed it until I'd seen this movie a few times, that the camera is very subtly just kind of like moving around. And I think that's also kind of like contributes to the unsettling vibe of it. One particular moment that actually like scared me even more than like the scary man like popping out from behind the dumpster is that that part where Dan says, he says to Herb, he says, oh, well, you were also in my dream. You were standing right over there by that counter, and the camera slowly pans across to the counter, and like nobody is standing there right now. And then like the camera pans back to Dan's face, and he says, you're in both dreams and you're scared. And then a few minutes later, like Herb goes up to the counter to pay for their lunch, and then he's standing right where Dan said he was in the dream, and they kind of like look at each other across the diner, and it's just very, like, the glance is just very disquieting. And it's like that, I don't know, that really, really bothers me. And I don't know why. It's just like everything like that. Everything about that is like really, really scary. I also, the whole like walk out to like when they leave Winky's diner and they're going out to the back, like where he's going to show him, hey, there's no man behind the dumpster. Yeah, shows what you know, her, because there absolutely is somebody back there. But and Dan like has he either like, they don't really specify if he like if it frightened him to death. I guess that's what you're kind of supposed to imply, or if he just passed out or whatever. But even before that happens, like the whole walk out to the dumpster is like so nerve-wracking. It's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just that floating camera again, and it's just like this horrible feeling of dread because you just fucking know that there's going to be something back there, and it's like you don't know what it's going to be, and it's just so I mean, it's like, and it's broad daylight, it's like the middle of fucking, I don't even know, like some street in LA, like there's traffic going by. It should absolutely not be scary, but it totally is. Every single thing about this scene seems as though it was calculated to be as skin-crawlingly sinister as possible, but without being obvious about it or without being overtly frightening in any way. And it's just amazing. I just really wish that I could figure out how David Lynch did that. It's like I can point to little things, but I don't know why this scene like stressed me out. And it's not just me, like I've heard other people talking about it too, but it's just kind of like I don't know what it was that he did, that because if you describe it to somebody, it doesn't sound scary at all, but it's like when you watch it, it's just like bleh, it's just like, I don't know, it just gives me the fucking heebie-jeebies. I'm also amazed that, you know, it's not only that David Lynch managed to film this horribly ominous scene out of elements that aren't really scary at first glance. I mean, other than the Nightmare Man like popping out from behind the dumpster. But I'm actually even more amazed that he's done it more than one time. I mean, I think this was the best example of it, but I kind of feel like one of the things that I love about David Lynch, and one of the things that always freaks me out in movies, and again, I'm not really entirely sure why, it's just my thing, I don't know why, but he does this a lot in his movies, and I don't know what I would call it. It's like, I'd call it, it's like, is it time displacement? Not exactly. I don't exactly know. He's done a bunch of scenes where the line between reality and nightmare is blurred, of course, but he seems to have like a thing for playing with overlapping timescales and with characters being in two places at once, like stuff like that. And that kind of stuff like freaks me out, and I don't really know why. Like in Inland Empire, for example, like from 2006, there's a scene where the intensely freaky looking Grace Zabriskie, who was in a bunch of his movies, she plays a character just named Visitor Number One, and she's in Laura Dern's house, and she points to an empty couch, and she basically says, if it was tomorrow, you would be sitting right over there. And it just, it just like fucking freaks me out. And then suddenly, like, it is tomorrow, like they jump to tomorrow, and Laura Dern is sitting where the old woman said she'd be sitting, and it's like, I don't know, that really bothers me. Also, probably more famously, there's that scene in Lost Highway from 1997 where Robert Blake, with the kind of white makeup on, is there at the party, and he's talking to Bill Pullman, and he's just kind of like, hey, not only am I standing here talking to you, but I'm at your house right now. Call me. You know what I mean? Oh my God. Every scene that David Lynch has done like that has freaked me the fuck out. And I don't really know why. I have no idea, like, why that kind of thing scares me so much. Like, hey, tomorrow you'd be over there, or there's like, or I'm at your house right now. I don't know. People being in two places at once, I don't know why that freaks me out so much, but it really does. Every single time. And I think if they put it in another movie, it probably wouldn't bother me, but like the way that David Lynch does it, like really disturbs me, and I can't put my finger on why that could be. If anybody like has any training in psychology or anything like that could give me any, and it's because I'm actually really curious. I don't know why it scares me, like more than pretty much anything else. But every time that happens in a movie, even just somebody pointed at an empty couch, if it was tomorrow you'd be sitting over there, it's like, oh my God, that freaked me out so bad. I mean, and I won't even get into the whole scene at the end of Inland Empire where they cut away from Laura Dern's face, and then her face is all fucking distorted. That fucked me up too. I didn't like that either. But yeah, anything like that where people are kind of in two places at once, that like, I don't know what it is, because it just goes to show, though, that whatever it is that David Lynch is tapping into, I kind of feel like he's a very I don't know, he just seems like he goes with his gut. He seems like he's a very subconscious filmmaker, so I think that he's really good at putting on screen like things that people have seen in their nightmares, or it's more like an emotion-based thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to make like narrative sense, even though a lot of times it does, like just in spite of itself. But I think the fact that he does that, I think it really kind of like, it really gets to you on a level that you can't explain, like, because it's almost like when you have a nightmare and it's like horrifying, but then you wake up and you think about it and you're like, well, that wasn't scary. Or you're like explaining it to somebody else and they're like, that doesn't sound very scary. And you're like, you're right, it doesn't sound very scary. But when you were in the dream, it was a whole like dream logic, and it was totally, totally scary. I think that he's the only filmmaker that I've ever seen that was able to approximate that, like, on film, you know what I mean? Like that feeling. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the reason that I'm so like wigged out by all of the scenes that he does like that, because he's just really good at just making everything just slightly off. Like, you know, we're just doing it's a little bit too close up on this character. Maybe that smile is a little bit too wide. Maybe it's just, and you can't really put your finger on what it is, but it's all of these little things that are adding up, and it's like really, really uncanny, and he's really, really good at doing that. But yeah, so I mean, if you haven't seen Mulholland Drive, if you think that Winky's Diner is one of the scariest scenes ever, please let me know, because like I said, for a long time I thought I was alone, but then when I kind of started researching it, I'm like, oh, thank God. I thought I was like crazy that I was like the only person that thought that was the scariest thing ever, but apparently there are some other people that think that too. So shoo, okay, I'm not a crazy person. So I've talked before about my love of atmospheric horror. Scenes that kind of, you know, and they're really all too rare in horror. And I'm not saying that I don't like real visceral over the top horror, because I totally do. But it doesn't scare me. So I'm always kind of like looking for something that will like scare me. And usually if something's going to scare me, then it's going to be all like suggestion and subtlety and things like that. And it's going to like just ramp up this dread. That to me is like way, way scarier than, you know, than gore, or them just like throwing things in your face or things like that. You know what I mean? It's because, and it's much harder to do, which is why you don't really see it all that much. So the next scene I want to talk about is actually like a prime example of this. It's very, very simple, but it's pretty fucking effective. So the excellent Pang Brothers film, The Eye, from 2002. I shouldn't have to warn anybody against bothering with the vastly inferior American remake. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't really all that great. So this movie, I kind of feel like a lot of people don't really talk about it anymore, but to me, I thought this was actually one of the big standouts of the kind of Asian horror renaissance that happened sometime like in the mid to late 90s. And, you know, then they did all the American remakes. I'll get into that a little bit again, because I got to like some more shit to say about that. But this is kind of like this movie too is another illustration of the fact that not all horror filmmakers are actually content to rely on just, you know, visceral shocks or like over the top like CGI or something like that to kind of deliver the impact. So the premise of this movie, The Eye, is pretty straightforward. You know, it's been done before, I think, even. So there's a character named Mun, and she's a classical musician, and she's been blind since early childhood. Now, she gets a corneal transplant, and after that happens, she got a little bit more than she bargained for. Like, yeah, she can see now, but unfortunately, she can also see ghosts. Did I mention that the ghosts that she can see are also portents of impending deaths? So yeah, that too. Now, as I was researching this video, like the notes for it, I discovered that, again, I was absolutely not alone in singling out one particular scene in this movie as one of the scariest in cinema. And if you've seen the movie, you know the scene that I'm talking about. That elevator. Fuck. Oh my God, it was so scary. Okay, so elevators obviously make pretty frequent appearances in horror films and in thrillers as well, probably because most people, including me, find them a little bit unnerving at the best of times. You're kind of confined in a tight metal box that could conceivably trap you in the limbo between floors, or, you know, God forbid, suddenly send you plunging down to the basement to your doom. You know, and it kind of added to this too is the unease that we feel when we're forced into close quarters with strangers. You know, that's never a good time. So the elevator scene from The Eye takes all of our kind of, everyday anxieties about elevators and ramps that shit way up into the stratosphere. So Mun has returned to her apartment building and is waiting for the elevator, as you do. Now the door glides open, but when she looks in there, she sees what appears to be an old man in pajamas standing in the back corner with his face turned toward the wall. That's another thing that fucking freaks me out. Because, like, remember when I said earlier, like, people being in two places at once? People over there, like, standing facing the wall, like, for no reason. Because you just know they're going to turn around and shit's going to be all fucked up. You know what I mean? So that really stresses me out, too. So she opens the thing, and there's this old guy, like, standing in the corner with his face against it. I'm just like, oh, shit, this is not good. This is not good, whatever it is going on. So she kind of is very nervously glances up at the CCTV cameras, like, up on the thing, and she sees that what appears to be a clearly occupied elevator, like there's an old dude in pajamas in there, is actually empty, which leads her to the obvious conclusion that the man that she's seeing is no longer among the living. Because like I said, at this point, she's figured out that, oh, holy shit, I can see ghosts now. So wisely, she's just like, yeah, I'll wait for the next one. You know what I mean? But as she stands there, like this other young couple just kind of comes, yay! They just kind of come in there and into the ghost evader, completely unaware that this old dude is like in there. So the couple like looks at her weirdly as she just keeps looking at them and looking up at the CCTV and looking at them and looking in the corner, and they're just like, what the fuck is your deal? You know what I mean? So then the door closes. So the next elevator comes. And Mun, like, she's very apprehensively, like, peering into the car and she's, like, looking up at the cameras. So this elevator, thankfully, appears to be wraith-free, so she reluctantly gets on board. And then at this point, there's a lot of, like, really tense close-up. There's like, her hand pushing the floor button and her big eyes and all this other kind of stuff. So the elevator starts to climb very, very, very slowly, like up the floors, and you can just see like Mun is very intensely nervous, and she's almost like expecting the inevitable. She's just like sitting there like freaking out, like, oh my god, I know something bad's gonna happen. I know something bad's gonna happen. And I think that really, really does kind of help, build up the fucking dread in this scene. And of course, soon enough, her fears are realized. This hazy reflection appears in the steel wall of the elevator. It's the old man, and his back is still to her, which makes the whole thing, like I said, 1,000 times creepier. That is just so fucking creepy. Again, I don't know why. She knows he's fucking back there, and she's like visibly petrified, like her face. You can just see she's like, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. It was just like that. She resolutely, though, does not turn to look. So she just stands there. She's like paralyzed with fear, but she is clearly like losing her shit. And the old man is just gliding like behind her, like back to back, like he's coming toward her back like that. And it was like, oh my God, this is so stressful. So then there's like an eerie shot of the man's bare feet, like hovering like a few inches above the floor behind her. And then the old man like starts to turn around like he's floating, and he's like turning around like that so slowly. And then like as he turns, we see there's a horrifying fucking canyon where like half of his face should be. It's just kind of, oh my God. And it's like, and it's brief. They just kind of show it quick, like enough for you to get like a suggestion of it. And you're like, oh no, oh no. And then it's like, then he's just like gliding toward her, and his toes are just about to touch the back of her ankles. And oh my God, it's the fucking worst. It's the fucking worst. So but wait, it's not over. That part like fucking stressed me the fuck out. But then it's like not even over. So the elevator door opens, and she sprints right the fuck out of there, as you would again, and she goes tearing down the hall. So she gets to the door, and she's like frantically trying to get in, like fucking fumbling with her keys and all that other kind of shit. Her key won't work, and then she's like, oh shit, like in her panic, obviously, because there's a fucking ghost like right behind her, she got off on the wrong floor. So she goes bolting toward the stairwell and kind of stumbles on the steps, and she passes this little boy in a baseball cap who's on the landing. Now when she reaches the top of the stairs, she turns to look at the boy. The boy suddenly runs toward the window and jumps right the fuck out. Like it's not even explained. I mean, obviously the boy was a ghost too, but you didn't know that because the kid just looks completely normal. And so she's just like, hey, kid that also lives in the building. And then he just all of a sudden is like, bye. Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, this scene, I mean, it's... I really kind of feel like maybe if you take like if you're going to film school and they're like talking about how to set up a horror scene, I hope that this scene is in there, because this one, it hits all the right notes. There's these, you just have those tight, tense close-ups of, you know, the terror in Mun's face, because I think a lot of horror too, like a lot of it is reaction. And I mean, you know, Stanley Kubrick obviously understood that, because his big thing was, before he'd show you the horror, he showed you the horror in the person's face that was witnessing it. And so it was priming you. It's like, oh man, they are seeing some fucked up shit right now, and in a second I'm about to see it. So I think that's like a really underused thing from horror that they do. But like I said, Kubrick did it a lot, particularly in The Shining. But yeah, so they have like all of these really great close-ups of her face. They have like this, the scene is just washed in this real kind of bluish, like a flat, like bluish silver light. You know, there's this whole trapped feeling of helplessness and just kind of wishing the elevator would just hurry up and get to her floor, god damn it. You know, because the fucking ghost is back there. I mean, the old man's ghost is just this languid menace that he's just kind of like floating up behind her. He's in no hurry, you know what I mean? And it's just like, it's horrible. And, you know, it's just like his feet like are floating, and it's just, oh my God. And then like after that, you know, she runs out the elevator, at which point, you know, your tension that you had built up is like, oh, thank God, you know what I mean? Like, it's released. And then there's that kicker, like at the end where she sees that kid, and then the kid jumps out the window too, just like that little bam, like that second. I mean, that's so good. I just think that was like masterfully done, because you think like the danger's over. Oh, she's okay. She's outside of the elevator now. And then that shit happens. And I was just kind of like, man, I was like, bravo. I almost wanted to clap like after that scene, because it was just like it was just so perfectly realized. And I don't know, I hope that they study it in film schools, because they absolutely should. So here's another scene that, for whatever reason, has stuck with me for 40 years, even though the rest of the movie is good, but it's just kind of like mid-tier. The scene itself is only a couple minutes long, but I still remember, like, the first time I saw this movie, I was probably 11, maybe younger. I still vividly remember, I think I saw it on cable. I didn't see it in the theater. I think the first time I saw this, I think my fucking heart actually stopped. And every time that I watched this movie subsequently, because I did watch it subsequently, because you know how I do, I think I covered my eyes through that. Oh, and I also had the novelization of it that came out after the movie. I mean, it's Dracula, obviously, but it was, you know, a version that had come out like in conjunction with the movie, and it had color stills in the middle of the book of the movie, and there was a picture of this scene in there, and I kind of had to blip past it all the time when I was a kid, because it like stressed me out so bad. So obviously we're talking about John Badham's version of the classic Dracula from 1979, starring Frank Langella as the titular count. Now, this came out about the same time as a few other vampire films, notably Werner Herzog's remake of Nosferatu, starring weirdo Klaus Kinski. So Badham's version, I kind of feel like it wasn't horribly reviewed, but I think that audiences were kind of experiencing some vampire fatigue. So it only did sort of so-so business at the box office. So like I said, I was only 7 when this came out in theaters, so I didn't really see it until it ran, you know, on cable a few years later. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think this was actually the first of the major Dracula film adaptations that I ever saw, like even before the more famous like Hammer versions or the Bela Lugosi one. I think this was actually the first Dracula that I saw. So very much like the 1931 Universal Bela Lugosi film, this version of Dracula was based on the stage play rather than the novel, and followed a lot of the tropes of the Universal version. For example, Dracula is portrayed as a kind of seductive romantic figure rather than a rat-like monster, as in the book. And the entire first part of the novel, where Harker is kept prisoner in Dracula's castle, is removed. So that kind of allows the movie to start with the Count's arrival on English shores. Something that this movie does that I thought was odd, though, is that it reverses the characters of Lucy and Mina. And it's not the only Dracula adaptation that does this, which confuses the hell out of me. In this version, like, Mina is the first one attacked and vampified by Dracula, and Lucy is Harker's fiancée, and she gets attacked later, but she gets saved, like, ultimately, when the vampire gets staked. The movie also, this particular movie also portrays Mina as the daughter of Van Helsing and Lucy as the daughter of Dr. Seward. Like, these changes don't ruin the story or anything, but they also don't really add much of anything to it, so I'm not really entirely sure why they were made. Maybe because some characters were eliminated for brevity, like poor old Quincy Morris, who never gets to be in the Dracula movies except for the Francis Ford Coppola one. I'm just speculating that maybe the screenwriter thought it would increase maybe the drama and the emotional coherence of the characters to make them all related somehow, like, rather than kind of strangers to one another. But, you know, I don't know if that's the case. That's my guess, but I don't know. It still doesn't explain why Lucy and Mina were reversed, but whatever. Now, as I said, I like this film just fine. It's not my favorite Dracula adaptation, but it's a decent one. And I always really liked Frank Langella as Dracula. I thought he was great in this. But this one brief scene in this movie really stood out to me, and it still kind of wigs me out a little bit, not gonna lie, this many decades after I first saw it. Now, if my quick Google search is any indication, I'm not the only one that has had this scene burned into my memory since childhood. The thing about it is, again, I'm not really entirely sure why this scene is so memorable. It could be simply because, like, in the context of the film, it's kind of shockingly unexpected. This version of Dracula was actually kind of marketed more as a supernatural romance, like, rather than a straight horror film, and actually kind of played a little bit more like that, like a romantic, like, English parlor drama that just happened to have a vampire in it. There was little to no gore that I remember from this movie, and nothing was really, like, all that outright frightening. But then this happens. So Mina has been exsanguinated by the Foxy Count one night while her friend Lucy is out tramping it up with Jonathan, which I know if you've read the book, you're going to be like, what? That sounds, yeah, but you know what I mean? Because they switch the characters around. Anyway, so the next morning, Mina is very pale and she's gasping for breath, and she ends up dying as a rather horrified and kind of guilty Lucy, because like I said, she was not hanging out with her friend while she was dying. She was out, like, gallivanting with her boyfriend, you know, but she's kind of watching, being like, oh shit, I feel kind of like a shitty friend, but whatever. So Dr. Seward has no idea, obviously, what could have killed Mina, and summons Dad Van Helsing to help solve the mystery. Now, Van Helsing obviously is no slouch, and he immediately jumps to the most obvious conclusion, which is that Ina Nosferatu is running around loose in the vicinity. As an aside, though, this is Van Helsing that we're talking about, so I kind of feel like he probably just blames a vampire every time one of his socks disappears from the wash. You know, sure, he was right in this case, but, you know, a stop clock and so forth. But yeah, I'm just saying, it's like, it was vampires, like every single thing. Anyhow, so Seward and Van Helsing visit Mina's new grave in the cemetery and find that her coffin is not only empty, but contains this sort of, like, ragged hole where she presumably, like, dug herself out. So the hole leads underground into some old mining tunnels, and the two of them, they crawl down there to investigate, pretty sure of what they're going to find when they get down there. So as they're kind of, like, peering into the darkness, like, you know, visions of the beautiful, recently deceased Mina probably uppermost in their minds, I would imagine, they start to hear, like, this shuffling sound coming toward them. So they raise their lamps or candles or whatever the fuck they had, and there, shambling out of the darkness, is a fucking horror show of a person, like, reaching for them and, like, begging for a kiss. Like, she looks horrifying. Mina looks fucking horrifying. When I was a kid, the first time I saw that shit scared me so fucking bad. Because, like I said, this was Dracula. I'd seen, like, I had, like, a little comic book version of Dracula that was, like, you know, close to the novel and everything like that. But this was kind of the first adaptation, I think, that I saw. But up to this point, because this happens, like, kind of toward the end of the movie, up to this point there hadn't really been any gore or any kind of, like, anything, like, really overtly scary. But then, like, the two of them are down in these, like, creepy old mining tunnels, and all of a sudden turn around and bam, and she just, like, fucking looked like that. I was like, oh no. And I mean, yeah, it, like, stressed me out. Like, and it still kind of, like, creeps me out a little bit because the makeup on it is really, really good. I think, like, yeah, she looks like a shambling corpse and shit like that. Maybe she looks like a vampire, but I think it's, like, the weird, like, shine that they put in her eyes that, like, kind of, like, freaked me out the most, and I'm not really sure why that is. But in this sense, maybe it was, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it was a sound storytelling decision to make Mina Van Helsing's daughter, because the whole tragedy of how the scene plays out is like really, really apparent, and it really does like underscore the horror like really effectively. I mean, yes, the figure of undead Mina is terrifying to look at, but she's also kind of heartbreaking and like kind of pitiful, and you really kind of feel it when Van Helsing has to put her down, but that's because that's his daughter, you know what I mean? Whereas in the, you know, in the book, obviously they're not related, so it wouldn't have the same emotional resonance, I guess. So maybe that was kind of like a wise decision, because they knew this scene was coming, I guess. And they were just kind of like, can you imagine being a dad and like being like, oh, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna see my like fucking vampified daughter walking around down here, and it's like, oh man, she looks even worse than I could have imagined, and now I have to kill her. It's like, it's awful. But I was gonna say the rest of the movie isn't like as powerful as that, but man, that scene is a knockout. It's so good. But let me know if that scene like stressed you out, because like I said, for a long time I couldn't even look at the picture like in the novelization of the makeup that they did on her, because it was just like so fucking terrifying looking. So let's talk about Dario Argento, shall we? Specifically, let's talk about him long ago when he was still collaborating with Daria Nicolodi and making these kind of beautiful, surreal, violent, kick-ass horror and giallo movies. So back in the day, Argento, it seemed like he couldn't put a foot wrong. Like every single one of his movies back then was good. I mean, Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Cat o' Nine Tails, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, Deep Red, Opera, Tenebrae, like all fantastic movies. But because I mentioned Daria Nicolodi, and because I didn't mention it in that last litany, that last list of the movies, you guys know which movie I'm probably going to be talking about. Of course you do. Suspiria. So this came out in 1977, obviously, if you didn't know, and was the first movie in Dario Argento's Three Mothers trilogy, loosely based on Thomas de Quincey's Suspiria de Profundis. The other two films were the pretty damn good Inferno, which came out in 1980, and the massively disappointing Mother of Tears, which didn't come out until 2007, which I actually have to see again because I remember really not liking it the first time I saw it, but I'm willing to like give it another chance, so I'll eventually get around to rewatching it. So basically, the mythology behind the trilogy is that there are three dreadful witches, Mater Suspiriorum, Mater Tenebrarum, and Mater Lacrimarum, which is Mother of Sighs, Mother of Darkness, and Mother of Tears. And they get up to all kinds of worldwide evil from their bases in Rome, Freiburg, and New York. So the films kind of take the mythos in three different directions, obviously. So they stand pretty much as individual movies. They're more kind of like variations on a theme, I guess, than like, you know, sequels or anything like that. So Suspiria is, the very nightmarish tale of an American ballet student named Susie Banyan who travels to an elite dance school in Freiburg, Germany, and slowly realizes that it's a front for an evil coven of witches headed by the terrifying Helena Marcos, who is the Mother of Sighs. First off, I have to say that Suspiria is probably, well, not even probably, is definitely one of the world's most beautiful films to look at. Argento not only shot this whole spectacular set, like all the gorgeous interiors and exteriors, in these super saturated hues, and he used all these special lenses and light filters, and he also used the same kind of unusual Technicolor process that was used on The Wizard of Oz from 1939. Every frame of this movie is like this strikingly composed light painting of kind of like a gruesome fairy tale. Like it has these really stark shadows and these just garish shafts of like red, blue, green, and yellow light like falling across these sort of Baroque and like hyper violent, murder tableaus. It's just, I mean, the whole movie, it looks so awesome that it's like almost ridiculous. It's almost too much, but it's just kind of like, I don't know. I just love the look of this movie. It's fucking gorgeous. So anyway, like on to the scene. Now, there are actually two scenes from Suspiria that are usually called out on various scariest scene lists And both of those are amazing too. I'm not saying that. The first scene that a lot of people talk about is that real tense, that real dynamite, like opening scene, that opening sequence where Susie is first arriving at the school in that big like torrential downpour. It has that great score going on, like intercut, while she's like arriving at the school, it's kind of intercut with the grisly murder of like this other student that was running away from the school. So that's, a fucking great opening sequence. The other scene, fittingly, is the closing one where Susie finally confronts, this horrible, terrifying figure of Helena Marcos, as well as the reanimated corpse of another murdered student, Sarah, who, was killed earlier on. And she ends up killing the witch with this beautiful, like, glass peacock feather spike thing, and like you can kind of see the witch like pop in and out because she's kind of invisible. It's a whole thing. But yeah, that's a great scene too. But I want to kind of talk about a lesser recognized scene that had that sort of subtle unsettling vibe that I'm so fond of, particularly when it appears in a film as sort of over the top, like operatic as this one is. So in this particular scene, all the catty ballet students have just been subjected to a literal rain of maggots in their respective quarters, which is, you'd think that's probably like the last thing that you'd expect to happen at one of these snooty and elitist ballet schools in Europe, you know what I mean? So the teachers and staff, who, spoiler alert, are all witches, are like, yeah, whatever, like, no big deal. Shit happens. There was probably just some rotten food, like, stored in boxes up in the attic or something, that's all. And the little maggots squirmed out through the cracks in the ceiling and kind of ruined everyone's day. It's all cool, though. We'll get it all sorted out. So while the students' rooms are all being degrubbed, the staff set up this kind of impromptu dorm in the practice hall, and they have like these kind of rows and rows of fold-out beds, and the girls and boys separated by this big, these high white curtains. Now, all the women are getting into the beds and trying to make the best of things. Oh, it'll be just like camp and yada yada. Now, one of the heads of the academy, this very stern woman named Madame Blanc, walks through the dorm to make sure everyone's comfortable. One of the students asks if the teachers are all going to be sleeping in the dorm too. And Madame Blanc says, yes, all of us will be, except for the directress, of course. Then Madame says, hey, is it okay if I turn the light out now? And everybody's like, sure. So she disappears behind one of the curtained walls. And then immediately, like, the whole space is like plunged into this saturated, like, blood red darkness, kind of like it looks like a photographic dark room, like it's super, super red. So there's kind of like some banter and tomfoolery and whatnot, as one of the male students like climbs up to say hello from the other side of the curtain and all that. And then the students like settle into bed and start gossiping and arguing and blah, 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 until one of the other girls tells them to put a fucking sock in it so they can all get some sleep. So then there's this kind of like creepy panning shot like across this dark red dorm. And on the soundtrack, there are all these like really eerie sounds of like sighing and wailing and screaming and kind of all this stuff, like sort of threaded through that ominous like prog rocky score, which of course was done by Goblin, who did a lot of his scores. And we can see shadowed silhouettes of like presumed staff members like sleeping on the other side of the curtain, filtered through that real intense like red light. Then we close in on a silhouette on one empty bed. There's nobody in it. Then this weird shadow like approaches this bed and sits down on it. It kind of looks like a woman, but something about her looks a little bit off. Like she almost looks bald for one thing. And she kind of like, as she reclines back on the bed, the silhouette of her body, like through the nightgown, looks like a skeleton. Like it almost looks like an X-ray. And then the background music, like it's louder and kind of weirder. We see Susie and her friend Sarah like lying on their bed side by side. And behind them is like right behind them, like in between them is that creepy ass silhouette like on the other side of the curtain. Then we start hearing this weird rattling, wheezing noise. So Sarah sits up in bed and she's listening. And then she like whips her head around to look at the silhouette behind them. And then there's a shot of Sarah from the other side, like someone is peeking through the curtain at her. And then she kind of like shakes Susie and is like, hey, are you awake? It's like, do you hear that snoring? She says, it's weird. And yeah, it is pretty weird. And it's very, very unnerving. So you can see like the chest of the silhouette like rising and falling like in time with the noise, right? Sarah gets out of bed and like kneels next to Susie's bed so she can like whisper to her. She says, they lied to us. She says, the directress is here. that's her, the one who's snoring. And then she points out back toward the sheet. Susie's like, how do you know that? And Sarah says, well, last year for a while, I lived in one of the guest rooms, and the ones at the top of the stairs. One night, I heard someone come in very late and get in bed in the room next to mine. And then as she's talking, like, it's like a really creepy whisper, like the whole thing, because they're very like whispering, they're trying not to be overheard. And she's looking around the room, and Susie is just like staring ahead, like wide-eyed, like getting like obviously freaked out. And then Sarah says, and then I heard this weird kind of snoring. She's like, I tell you, it was so weird, I never forgot it. She says, listen, do you hear that whistle? She's like, it's exactly the same. She like says it like that. And then she says, the next morning, Madame Blanc told me that the directress had spent a few hours at the school and had checked into the room next to mine. So and then she says, so you see, I know that's the directress. She's here. She's there. Like the way she said it like that, I was like, oh, stop. Ugh. Like, that freaked me out so much. So yeah, she's like right behind that sheet. Like she's right there. And it's like, and then there's like a close up of the head of the silhouette. And then there's this other creepy wheezing noise. And then they fade to black. So good. It's like, oh my God, that scene like freaks me out so much. And the thing about it too, like at this point in the movie, it's fairly early, maybe like halfway through. I can't really remember. But, by this point in the movie, we only know the directress by reputation. We're not yet really aware, obviously, that she's, the powerful witch, Helena Marcos. Even so, like, that there's obviously something weird going on with that scary ass woman behind that sheet. Like, that is not right, whatever the fuck that is. And I think this scene is a lot more affecting for that, like, given what we don't yet know about her. Because they're like building this stuff up, like building up the mystery surrounding this woman. So yeah, I mean, because this comes at about the halfway point of the film, more or less, it's a really, really good like tension building scene. It's just kind of like laden with just mystery and foreboding. It's just so great. And I feel like it's a scene from Suspiria that doesn't get talked about a lot. I mean, that's not surprising, I guess, because Suspiria is one of the best horror films ever made, and it has so many fucking fantastic scenes in it that it's easy for this one to get overlooked, because really it's just kind of like two girls whispering to each other kind of like in a red room, and there's like but for me, like, I don't know, there's just something about the way that they build it up, the way that she's talking, and she's like, she's there, you know what I mean? It's like, that really like freaks me out. And I don't really know why, but I just thought that I would point that one out, because I feel like it's a scene that a lot of people don't talk about from Suspiria, and I think it's a really, really good one. So in regards to the next two scenes I want to discuss, so this one and the next one, I kind of want to focus on a particular subset of body horror, which I guess I would call like kind of facial wrongness. I kind of feel like this is something that you see a lot like in movies nowadays, particularly the whole thing, because how I guess I want to say it was like around the 2000s, like there were a lot of horror movies where there'd be like a ghost or demon or a person that was supposedly possessed or something like that, and then they'd turn their face towards you, and then after a second, like their mouth would go and would go like really big like that. That's kind of the thing that I'm talking about, but I want to talk about a couple of examples that were kind of like that, as in facial wrongness, like that is very freaky, but ones that were more subtle and like, so to me, were kind of like scarier. The reason that body horror works, I'm guessing, is it seems reasonable to assume that, from an evolutionary standpoint, human brains developed with an instinctive ability to assess the physical normality of our fellow human beings in order to, I guess, like identify genetic fitness and potential mates and various other reasons. And that's kind of why there have been studies done all over the world that show that the humans that are consistently rated as the most attractive across cultures are the ones that have the most symmetrical features. I mean, I'm kind of simplifying here, but you get the gist. Like, humans know when someone looks okay and knows when they don't, even when they can't like articulate maybe like why something is bothering them about someone else's looks. So this feature of the human mind obviously can be subverted. Very famously, most people know about the concept of the uncanny valley, that unsettling gray area where, something that's supposed to look like a human, like a cyborg or something like that, or a doll, like looks so similar to a real human that we're almost fooled, but it's ever so slightly off in a way that we can't put our finger on, and then that causes us like intense discomfort. So horror filmmakers, whether consciously or not, I imagine most of the time it's probably consciously, honestly. They've been playing with the concept of subverting physical normality since, the beginning of horror movies, I'm sure. I mean, sometimes it's blatant, like, Reagan's, head spinning 360 degrees, or her freaky spider walk down the stairs, like in The Exorcist, or the kind of creepy, like, jerky movements of all those kind of long-haired female ghosts in all of those Asian horror films. And sometimes it's more subtle, like simply taking one facial feature and changing it in a way that upsets our deep-seated sense of physical regularity, like, slapping someone's nose on upside down or something like that. Something that's kind of subtle, you know what I mean? So, Twilight Zone, the movie. Maybe this wasn't where you thought I was going with this. This came out in 1983. And it was an anthology film featuring several stories by different directors. It was 5 stories. The bulk of the stories were actually adapted from episodes of the classic Twilight Zone TV series, obviously. And one of these, It's a Good Life, which was directed by Joe Dante, was sort of a loose remake of one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes of all time, the one that starred Bill Mumy as a functionally omnipotent child who could wish people into the cornfield if they did something to piss him off. So in the 1983 film version of it, there's a school teacher named Helen, and she stops at a cafe while she's on a road trip, and she meets a young boy named Anthony. Now, she intervenes when he's being harassed by bullies, and then she ends up giving him a ride home after she accidentally hits his bike with her car in the parking lot, which he totally did on purpose. She drives him back to his cavernous mansion of a house, and she quickly begins to discover that something is very, very wrong with Anthony. His entire family seems deathly afraid of him, for one thing, and take great pains to bend to his every whim. Whether that's, hey, I want candied apples and hamburgers with peanut butter on them for dinner, or whether that's all the TVs in the house have to be playing cartoons 24/7. It's all, they are like, whatever you want, Anthony, yes, sir. Turns out, though, that the family's fear is actually well-placed and understandable because Anthony, as you discover, has the supernatural ability to wish anything he desires into existence or out of existence and severely punishes anybody who interferes with what he wants. So one of the recipients of Anthony's wrath is his sister Sarah. So there's this scene where Helen is wandering the vast halls of the mansion that Anthony calls home, which are I just love the way this is shot and like lit and everything like that. It looks like it's not dark, but it's kind of dark. Like it's kind of like shadowed, like in a way, and it has kind of like the lights are sort of like a little bit saturated, and it almost kind of looks like a cartoon or like a fake. So it has like a little bit of like a fake kind of vibe to it, which actually kind of makes it creepier. So she's kind of wandering through these hallways, and she stops to look into this real long, like dark bedroom. Now, there's all these beds, like there are all these identical beds, like on a row, like along the wall, and they all have like identical stuffed pandas on them. And she kind of like smiles like, oh, that's kind of cute or whatever, even though it's a little bit unsettling if you actually saw that in real life, but she thinks it's kind of cute. But then she sees at the end of the room, there's a girl sitting in a wheelchair at the far end of the room with her back to the thing, which, like I said, that's another thing that really bothers me. I don't like that whole, like, we're seeing somebody in a horror movie and we're just seeing the back of their head, because if they turn around, there's going to be some fucked up shit on that, and I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. I mean, I do, because it's scary, but I'm just saying, that's, like, one thing that really scares me. So she sees this girl sitting, like, with her back to her, like, in a wheelchair. So the girl seems to be wearing pajamas, and she's kind of staring at this flickering TV screen, which is playing a loop of like a black and white cartoon. So Helen like calls out to her, but the girl doesn't answer and doesn't turn around. So Anthony comes up beside Helen in the doorway and explains, oh, this is my sister Sarah. She was in an accident. That's what he says. And then they start walking down the hall again. And then there's a shot of, like, we see Sarah from the front, although you can only see the top half of her face, like the top half of her head, because like the bottom of her face is concealed by the angle of the TV that she's watching. So her eyes are really wide and they kind of look a little bit crazy. Like she looks like she's following like whatever the fuck is going on in the cartoon. And then the camera tips upward and reveals the bottom half of the girl's face. and she has no mouth. It's just like a smooth flesh, like where the lips would be. No mouth at all, no nothing. It's just like a smooth expanse. And that, the first time I saw that, like, when is that fucking, that just made me go, like, all of the hair stood up when I saw that fucking shit. I don't know why. I mean, it's, like I said, it's so brief, and it's just so simple. I mean, there's no gore, there's no big blatant deformity. There's no thing like nowadays with like the whole blah, like with the mouth pulling open. You guys know what I mean. Like, you've seen that in a million movies. Like, since I think the first time I saw that was that an Exorcism of Emily Rose, I want to say, was maybe the first time, and then everybody like ripped that off. There might have been like a bunch of stuff that was in it before, but I think that was the first time that I had seen it in a movie, and I'm like, oh, it was scary there, but like, 50 bajillion movies later, when they all do the same thing, I'm like, seeing it, you know what I mean? But I get what they're going for, because that is like, in theory, that is like a very scary thing for the reason that I'm talking about, because facial wrongness is always like freaky. But for my money, I kind of feel like this is maybe creepier just because it's subtler. Like I said, there's nothing. It's just smooth, and it's just like, and it's fucking creepy looking. I mean, you find out later on that Anthony crippled his sister, like put her in the wheelchair and took her mouth away so that she wouldn't be able to nag him anymore. Now, the other sister, the one who reveals this information, who's not really the sister, but that's a whole thing. These are just people that he trapped there. They're not really his family. Yeah, so the other sister, who's actually played by Nancy Cartwright, who did the voice of Bart Simpson, obviously. She actually ends up having an even worse fate. Like, Anthony puts her in a cartoon, and then she gets like chased and eaten by a dragon. So, but I mean, that girl with no mouth, though, and like I said, the whole thing about Twilight Zone the movie is that it's creepy. I really do like Twilight Zone the movie. I love horror anthologies, you guys know. But and there's like the great scene too, like the whole the frame story thing where it's like, hey, want to see something really scary? Like, and then Dan Aykroyd like turning around, he looks like a monster. Like, that's great too. But like I said, that's a little more, that's scary, but it's like a little more like over the top. I really liked this one because it wasn't even like part of the main story. Like, she's not even a character. It was just this subtle little touch, and it just like really freaked me out. And it still kind of wigs me out a little bit to this day, just that smooth fucking mouth. So the second example of disturbing facial distortion is far more ostentatious than that, but it still like affected me a lot. Like, just the same, like really freaked me out, probably for the same reasons, even though, like I said, this one's kind of more over the top. So 1985's Fright Night, directed by Tom Holland, easily one of the best horror comedies of the decade, one of the best horror films of the decade, period. But I mean, easily one of the best horror comedies. And the thing that's great about it is that it's funny, and it's also like heartfelt, and it's also scary all in one. And it really like balances all of those really well. Like, I don't remember if I saw the remake. I kind of feel like it was all right, but I mean, the original is like so much better. So yeah, so you got Charlie. He's a high school kid. He's just a regular kid. He lives with his single mother. He has like kind of a goofball horror nerd best friend whose name is Evil, and he has a very goody two shoes girlfriend named Amy. Apparently, Charlie also has a vampire as a new neighbor, although naturally, no one believes this. So through binoculars, Charlie's been watching his neighbor, whose name is Jerry Dandridge, and Jerry seems to be like picking up high-class escorts and later carrying suspiciously body-shaped garbage bags out of the house next door with the help of his manservant / thrall, Billy Cole. Now, after trying to alert his family and his friends and the police, and obviously none of that works out, Charlie gets desperate and enlists, he buys the services of his hero, a has-been horror host by the name of Peter Vincent, who's played by Roddy McDowall in a fucking fantastic role. He's fucking great in this. To help him stop, because he's been in like a lot of cheesy old vampire movies, so he's like, well, if anybody knows about vampires, it'll be this guy that was in like all these Z-grade vampire films. Now, at one point, the charismatic vampire, Dandridge, has put like all of his vampy moves on the very virginal Amy, and he chases them, like the two of them, to a downtown nightclub, and then he starts like dancing with her very seductively before biting her. Now, later on in the movie, Charlie comes across Amy like in the basement of Dandridge's house because he's basically bitten her and like taken her away. and she's nearly unrecognizable. Like, before she looked very kind of like I said, very virginal, very frumpy. You know, she had kind of little short curly hair, and she had kind of very not nerdy, but just very kind of frumpy 80s clothes a little bit. You know, just very high necks, like sweatshirts, that kind of stuff. So, but at this point, her formerly good girl demeanor has been completely transformed into essentially like a feral sex pot. I mean, to be honest, it was a giant upgrade. But to me, I mean, I thought, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, if you guys have been around for a long time, know that a couple years back, well, I don't think it was last Halloween, but it might have been the Halloween before. I can't even remember. I actually dressed up as Amy's vampire form. I had the red curly wig and the white dress and the contact lenses, and did the mouth and everything like that, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But yeah, so I thought she looked a lot better, like, is what I'm trying to say. So she kind of like approaches him in this see-through white gown, and she bares the fangs at him, right? And then she starts like teasing him. She's like, "What's wrong? Don't you want me anymore?" And she's getting all like thing, because, you know, he was kind of like getting a little, you know, he wasn't obnoxious about it, but he was getting a little bit of blue balls, because she was just kind of like, "Oh, we can't do it yet," you know, that kind of thing. So now she's kind of like all up in his face, and he's kind of like freaked out by it a little bit. He's like, you know, this is a very frankly sexual creature right in front of him, who used to be his withholding girlfriend. So he kind of like thrusts a crucifix at her, and she like screams and turns away from him. Again, like turning that head away. And then she starts trying another tactic, she said. Then she puts on her regular voice again, and it's like all sad and pitiful. "It's not my fault. You said you protect me from him. Like, you know, why didn't you protect me? You said you wouldn't let him get me. You promised." And like all this other, because just trying to make him feel bad. So Charlie, dope that he is, totally falls for it. And he drops the crucifix and starts moving toward her, you know, calling her name and everything like that. And then we pan over to Amy's face, and yikes, holy crap. Like, they show her face, like she comes up like that, and it's just that big fucking rictus of a mouth. It's just like huge and wide, and it just has all these big sharp teeth in it. I mean, when I first saw that mouth, when I first saw this movie in 1985 or whatever, like when this movie came out in 1985, or maybe I saw it on video like in 1986, but when I first saw that mouth, like I said, I think my heart stopped a little bit, because I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting her to like look like a vampire, but I wasn't expecting that, you know what I mean? The way like the whole lower half of her face is just all mouth, and it was just kind of like, and between like the mouth and those round red eyes that she had, I kind of got the vibe of like this giant anaconda that was just about to swallow someone's head or some shit like that. And honestly, that image like just immediately like burned itself in my brain and stayed there. It was just so great. I mean, that's the special effects in that were so fantastic. And, you know, for his part, like Charlie, like seeing that, like she turns around and he's like, "Holy shit," you know what I mean? He screams, tries to fight her off, like, even though she does look hot, you know, he's pretty profoundly relieved when she's transformed back into her normal looking self after Jerry Dandridge gets killed. But you know what I mean? It's just, so I don't know, it kind of like leaves a question for the ages. Is it kind of better to have like a slightly annoying girlfriend who won't put out for you, or you know, alternately a supernatural oversexed hell beast who wants to eat your face off? You know what I mean? It's just kind of, I kind of feel like Charlie for a second was like, "Well, I might still hit that. Well, no, I better not," because you know what I mean? But yeah, that mouth is fucking great. And that was one scene that made like a massive impact on me, like the first time that I saw it. So, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven's 1984 classic, and really, I mean, a horror behemoth. It not only spawned 50 bajillion sequels and spin-offs, including like a TV show and merch and all that other kind of stuff. I mean, it really established one of the most recognizable, if not the most recognizable, horror baddie like of all time. So I imagine there's probably not a horror fan alive who hasn't seen it, unless you're like super young and you haven't got around to it yet. But I kind of feel like even then there's not really much excuse. Now, while the merits of all the sequels can and have been debated to death, I for one tend to think that most of the sequels, while they were good movies, I kind of think they veered too far into self-parody to actually be particularly scary, although the third one was really good. I think it's pretty much universally accepted that the original was one of the scariest horror films of the 80s. That was kind of before Freddy went into like the Freddy shtick, you know what I mean? Like, he made kind of like a couple quips in the first one, but in the first one he was just scary. Like, he was straight up scary. He wasn't like making jokes or coming up with all these crazy kind of like, you know, hey, I'm gonna like turn you into a roach and put you in a roach motel and like shit like that, you know what I mean? Which was fun, I'm not saying that, but it's not scary, you know what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying. So the scenes that, you know, most fans and like reviewers and stuff like that tend to point out when they talk about the scary parts of the original Nightmare on Elm Street are usually kind of the more splashy ones, in both senses of the word, I guess. You know, particularly the blood geyser that kind of comes out, like Johnny Depp gets sucked into his bed during the Miss Nude America pageant. So, you know, which is a great scene with all the blood coming out, like, and going across the ceiling. Or, you know, Tina getting killed, like, what, you know, she gets pulled up into the air and, like, flung around the ceiling, like, while her horrified boyfriend is watching, like, as she's getting stabbed, like, flying around the ceiling and stuff, which is, you know, that's great, too. Another popular choice for a scary scene is Freddy's appearance in Tina's dream. You know, like where he's kind of like walking down the alley, like in shadow, and like his arms are like really, really long, and he's like scraping the, you know, the finger knives against the fucking walls and shit like that. I mean, those are all great options, not, you know, not gonna say that. But the one I want to talk about is a lot less showy than those, since, as I keep repeating in this video, the creepiest scenes for me are the ones that are all about suggestion and atmosphere and stuff that's scary that you can't quite put your finger on why it's scary. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, if you had a nightmare where a burned dude was coming like with huge fucking arms like that, yeah, that's scary, but it's like, that's obviously scary. I think most people would be scared by that. I'm more scared by things that it's like, I can't figure out why I'm scared by that. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense? I'm not sure. Okay, so this scene that I want to talk about. So you got, obviously, your main protagonist, Nancy, Heather Langenkamp, and she's sitting in her English class wearing a really tragic combo of a pale pink sweater vest, I think, and like high-waisted beige slacks. People only remember like the cool fashions of the 80s. They don't remember this nonsense right here. It's like terrible looking. No, like it was all, like I said, it was very, very frumpy looking. Now, since her terrible dreams about Freddy have been keeping her up at night, she's understandably a little bit drowsy when she's in class. So she's kind of like struggling to keep her eyes open as the teacher just keeps like droning on and on. And then a student gets up in the front of the class and starts to read from Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar. So Nancy, she kind of blinks sleepily, but for a moment, we don't realize that she's dozed off, and neither does she, apparently. So then things start to get weird. So she happens to glance to her right, because everything in the classroom looks the same as it looked like a second before, like I said, so you don't know that she fell asleep. So she kind of like looks over to her right toward the door of the classroom, and she sees that her murdered friend, Tina, is standing in the doorway of the classroom, like in a body bag. Like, she's naked in there and it's all bloody on the inside. So Tina's hand like reaches out inside the plastic and like blood like down the thing, and she says, "Help me," like that. And then like Nancy turns back to like look at the classroom, like, is anybody else seeing this crazy shit, or is it just me? Okay, that's what I figured. And then the boy is still standing at the front of the class, like reading Julius Caesar, but now he's staring straight at Nancy, and he's reading in like this really flat, menacing whisper, and that freaked me the fuck out. I mean, the first time I heard that whisper, and like I said, it's not showy. Like I said, it's pretty creepy to like look at it. It's like, hey, there's your murdered friend, like in a body bag, like standing right there, and nobody can see it. But then like the fact that it just goes, like I said, it's very subtle. Like that guy was reading before, just like in a normal voice, blah blah blah, like reading Julius Caesar, and then all of a sudden he's like, and then the thing, and blah blah. And I was just kind of like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. I mean, I think the first time I saw this movie, like the first time that happened, like I think my blood like legit ran cold. That, I don't know. It's just like that. It freaks me out for whatever reason. One of the things, other than people appearing in two places at once and shit like that in the back of people's heads, another thing that disturbs me the most in movies is when a character like suddenly and inexplicably starts speaking in a different voice. So like scenes like that had kind of the same effect on me, where like obviously in The Shining, like with Danny when he's croaking red rum and then suddenly it gets like super higher pitched, like that like freaked me out. In of all things, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where like the judge's normal voice jumps into like screeching cartoon mode, that really freaked me out. That scene in The Others with Nicole Kidman, where like that little old woman is talking in the voice of Nicole Kidman's daughter, like, I am your daughter, like, oh, ugh, like everything. I don't know. I realize this is just my thing, like I said, but I don't know, just people suddenly talking in a different voice, that I don't know why that bothers me so much. And like I said, it has to be, it's not every time. Like, you can't just be talking and then all of a sudden go, blah, 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 and then I'll be like, oh my God, and I'll wet my pants or anything. It's not like that. But it's just kind of like, if it's done right, then it usually, like, will make all my hair stand up, you know what I mean? And I don't know why. So the thing about it, like, so even though there's a lot of unsettling elements of this scene in Nightmare on Elm Street, that the one point where that boy who is reading in a normal voice starts reading, like, and he's whispering and it's slow and shit like that, to me that was like the most unnerving part of that scene, I mean, to be honest with you. Now, so moving on to the rest of the scene, like, Nancy looks back at the doorway, body bag Tina is gone, but there's still like a big old puddle of blood on the floor, like where she was. So Nancy gets up from her seat, because it's a dream, because in real life I'd be like, nope, I'm just gonna stay right here, thank you. And she goes out into the empty hallway, and then there's this big wide blood trail like all the way down the hall, and then at the end of it there's Tina like lying in her body bag. Now her feet are like raised up like there's an invisible person like holding them, and then she gets dragged slowly out of the frame. So this entire scene is 5 minutes long, but it's really only the first 2 minutes to me that are like effectively scary. I mean, because once Nancy runs around the corner and crashes into that snotty hall monitor in the telltale striped sweater, and then kind of goes down into the boiler room where she confronts Freddy, who's kind of, you know, big as life and has all that chest goo that's green and stuff. I kind of feel like the most frightening part of the scene has already happened. To me, like, the little details of the build-up are what make that scene scary. After that, it's just kind of like a come down from the high. To me, the scariest part, it's like a roller coaster. The scariest part is all the shit going up, 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 up. Like, once you're going down, it's not scary anymore. I kind of feel like, so all of the stuff like leading up to that is what's scary to me, not the pop at the end. You know what I mean? Where she actually sees Freddy. That's not scary to me. But that boy reading Julius Caesar and then like his voice goes whispery, that's fucking scary. I don't really know why, and maybe everybody will think I'm insane for saying that, but it's true, and I can't explain it either. If you can, then please do, because I'm very curious, because I can't explain it myself. So this very underrated Australian mockumentary from 2008 is simultaneously one of the spookiest and one of the saddest horror films I've ever seen. And I think one of the things that makes it so disquieting for me is, again, its subtlety and its quiet realism. Like, they were so committed to the realism that it's like, the one, they chose kind of not well-known actors, and they didn't write a script, really. They just, I mean, they had a script, but they had kind of like, well, this is what, you know, the gist of this scene is going to be, like, improvised, because they wanted it to be, which I guess they did with the Blair Witch Project and shit like that too, because they wanted it to be natural. They wanted these, and man, they succeeded in spades, because everybody in this looks exactly like a real documentary. There's nobody in here seems like they're acting, and that really, really adds like a lot of the creep factor to this fucking movie. So as I mentioned, the movie set up as like a documentary style exploration of the strange aftermath of the death of a 16-year-old girl named Alice Palmer. So while spending the day at like a picnic spot, like at a dam with like, you know, kind of body of water there, she's there with her family one day, and Alice disappears. And then later they find her dead, like she's drowned. Now, because Alice's father, Russell, is the one who has to identify his daughter's really like upsettingly bloated corpse, I mean, it's pretty fucked up looking. Her mom, Rosie, is still kind of holding out hope that Alice might still be around. Like, maybe that's not really her. I think she thinks she's dead, but I don't know if she's entirely accepted it. Now, so she kind of thinks Alice might still be around, whether she's alive or whether she's haunting the place or whatever. So for a while, though, it does kind of seem like her suspicions that Alice is still around do have merit, at least in one sense, because there start to be all of these very eerie occurrences around the Palmer home, and they lead the family to believe that Alice is haunting them. So her brother Matthew sets up video cameras around the house to try to record like whatever this paranormal phenomena is. They also consult this psychic named Ray, who is supposed to be helping them with the investigation and maybe helping them sort out whatever the fuck is going on. Now, during the course of this investigation, some images are captured, like images and video and stuff, that make it fairly clear that Alice's ghost is indeed lurking around, perhaps trying to communicate something important to them. So far, so creepy. All right, it's all good. It's like a haunted house type of thing. We like that. But then the movie throws us for a complete loop. When it's revealed, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this movie, please don't watch any farther, because this movie's much better if you don't know which direction it's going in, okay? And I'm warning you right now. Okay, we good? All right, because I'm going to tell you. So it's revealed that Matthew has been faking all of the footage that purportedly showed Alice. Now, he admits on the documentary when they interview him that he did it because he was worried about his mom not having any closure about his sister's death, and he hoped that by maybe casting some doubt on the whole affair, that he'd be able to get Alice's body exhumed, which he does actually succeed in doing, at which point his mom would finally have to come to terms with the fact that Alice was dead because she would be able to see the body. So the whole supernatural angle of the movie was just a hoax, you're saying? Well, yes, but not so fast. So while the family is sorting through the videos that Matthew made, they actually come across something that's not paranormal, but just as unsettling. They find footage of their neighbor poking through Alice's room as though he's looking for something. So it turns out that Alice, who had babysat for the neighbors on several occasions, was also involved in a sexual relationship with the couple, which may or may not have been entirely consensual. And she had a video of the shit, like, in her room. So here are even more secrets about Alice that her family didn't know. And her parents are starting to get more and more they're starting to despair over the fact that they only discovered their daughter was essentially a stranger to them, like, after she was gone. They also find out that, unbeknownst to them, Alice had been to visit the same psychic that later came to help with the supposed haunting, the guy named Ray, and that she had told him that she was having really disturbing, premonitions of her impending death. It also comes to light that she'd been on a school trip to Lake Mungo, title drop, not long before she died, and a classmate's cell phone footage inadvertently recorded her burying something at the base of a tree out there. So her family, later on, go out there to uncover, whatever it was that she buried, and they find Alice's cell phone. And on that cell phone is one of the creepiest fucking things that I ever saw in a movie. And really, when I was just thinking about it, is kind of giving me goosebumps a little bit, because I can picture it. So the video, which is on the cell phone. Now, the video, of course, is low res and very grainy because 2008. And to me, though, that makes it all the more uncanny and fucking terrifying. So this video was apparently taken while a very distraught Alice was walking along the lakeshore, feeling as though something ominous was going to happen to her. So on the video, a figure slowly approaches out of the darkness. And at first, it just kind of looks like another person. You just think it's another girl being like, hey, what are you doing, or whatever. But as it gets closer, you, watching the movie, starts to realize that the figure is a doppelganger of Alice, except the doppelganger looks exactly like the bloated corpse of her that was pulled from the lake near the beginning of the movie. The shot, it's so brief. It's maybe less than, I don't even think it's a minute. It's it's super, super short. but it's so impactful. I mean, I think all the more so because the movie surrounding it is just like so quiet and so restrained. And then you see, and because like I said, there's no jump scares, there's no nothing like that in this movie. It's just very subtle, but it's just like so insidious. And that fucking scene, man, where she's just kind of like, because you can tell she's like freaked out because she's been having these, you know, portents, like she's having omens and dreams and everything like that something bad's gonna happen to her. And then like she's filming, and then all of a sudden and she knows that's her. I mean, you can still tell that's her. Oh my god, it's like, it's super creepy. So Alice obviously knew she was going to die, and she had been troubled for quite a while beforehand, although, you know, her parents didn't have any idea what was going on with her. So the sad thing about this, so after all of that, once the family have kind of like come to terms with it, they've accepted Alice's death, and they move out of the house. They're like, okay, we're going to start over again. We're going to, you know, try to put the pieces back together. So, you know, they're ready to carry on with their lives. But the movie leaves us with this one really final, like really tragic twist. Turns out that the fake photos of Alice's ghost that Matthew made are shown again, but this time we see that the real spirit of Alice is standing there in a spot like over here where we didn't notice before, because you just saw the fake one over here, and it's, like I said, it's very subtle. But so you know, you could be forgiven for not noticing like the actual ghost over here because you're looking at the fake one that's over here. So that means that Alice's ghost actually was in the house the whole entire time, and now her whole family have left her there alone. And it's just, ooh, I just got chills like that. I just got chills like talking about it. It's like, it's creepy, but it's also like really sad. It's one, like I said, it's one of the saddest horror movies I've ever seen. And like I said, if you're not real into like subtle horror or anything like that, you might not dig it, but people that are really into, because you really kind of have to get invested in it. It's very restrained, but it's like really creepy, and it's really well done. And I kind of wish that more people would see it because it's like really amazing. So most of you guys know, back in the early 2000s, it seemed like any Asian horror film that got any kind of buzz in the horror community was going to be remade for American audiences. And while most of these were not really all that great, as I mentioned earlier when I was, briefly when I was talking about The Eye, the Pang Brothers movie, I will give director Gore Verbinski a massive amount of credit, not only for making the sole American remake of an Asian film that I actually thought was better than the original, but also for making a movie that scared the absolute shit out of me when I saw it in the theater in 2002. So props there. So, like the 1998 original, The Ring is kind of like a supernatural murder mystery, essentially, revolving around, obviously, a mysterious videotape that supposedly has a curse attached to it. You know, long and short of it, you watch it, and 7 days later, you die. Now, in the 2002 American version, Naomi Watts, who is also in Mulholland Drive, matter of fact, plays a journalist named Rachel, whose sister asks her to look into the strange death of her daughter, who is Rachel's niece, whose name is Katie. Now, as Rachel investigates and eventually comes across a copy of the weird tape, she starts to believe that all of the urban legends about this video are absolutely true, and that now, she now has only 7 days to solve the mystery behind the videotape and figure out a way to break the death curse before it's too late. So, I mean, the whole vibe of this movie is like eerie as fuck. It's always, in the movie, it's always chilly and raining. Everything looks washed out and is tinted this like sickly, like bluish green kind of color. Every interaction between the characters seems haunted, very like melancholy, but also kind of like edged with menace. There are lots and lots of terrifying scenes in The Ring, including probably most famously Samara climbing out of the well and into our reality, like via the TV screen, like she pops out through the TV screen. That's terrifying. One of the scenes that like fucked me up the most was that very incongruous and really upsetting sequence of that panicking horse like leaping off the ferry and like getting chewed up by the boat propeller or whatever. That fucking fucked me up. And the footage on the videotape itself, that real flickering like surreal black and white kind of, I mean, that's pretty fucking freaky too. But for my money, the most effective scare in this film, like the one that stuck with me and literally gave me nightmares for I think a week or two after I saw it, happens only about 15 minutes into the movie. There's kind of like a spooky opening setup scene, like which I think is the first scene of the movie, in which the doomed Katie, who dies later on, and her friend Becca are in the house, and they're talking about this urban legend that's making the rounds. Oh, there's a videotape, have you heard about it, that kills you if you watch it. Now, Katie says, I think I might have seen that. But at first, like, she makes light of it. And then, though, creepy shit starts happening around the house. Like, the TV comes on by itself, like, with just static on it, like, multiple times. There's kind of, like, unexplained puddles of water on the floor, like, shit like that. So she's kind of going around being like, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck is happening? So, when the TV comes on, she's kind of staring at it and like her face just kind of goes slack. But then we cut away to Rachel picking up her son Aiden from school. Now, Aiden has been drawing kind of disturbing pictures of his cousin Katie for 3 days, like since she died. So we've done like a 3-day like hop into the future. So the next day, Rachel and her sister Ruth, who is Katie's mom, are talking at Katie's wake. Now, everything is very solemn and subdued, as it would be. Obviously, it's after a funeral. Ruth is bereft, of course, but she's also, like, really confused because she's like, look, no one can tell me exactly what killed my daughter. It seems that her heart just stopped for no reason. So while you as the viewer get sort of lulled into this scene, which is just literally, like, 2 women having a conversation, like, in a kitchen or something, Ruth says, kind of sadly, I saw her face. And then, bam, like the movie cuts to what Ruth saw, and holy shit, did that sudden cutaway like fuck me up for weeks afterward. God, I'm usually not all that affected by jump scares because they're often telegraphed. You usually is like, oh, there's somebody creepy is like walking down the hall. There's kind of ominous music. Then it goes quiet, and then you're like, oh, in just a second, something's gonna go ba-bam, like a cat's gonna jump out of the fucking something or whatever. It's just something like that. So they're telegraphed. Yeah, they'll make you jump because it's a loud noise. It's just a startle response, but they're not. I don't know, but this jump scare I think is one of the best jump scares like in all movies ever because it's not done exactly like that. This one was absolutely not telegraphed by any stretch of the imagination. It's just in the middle of a scene that didn't have anything to do with that. And I think that made it a lot more terrifying because you didn't have time to get ready for it. You were just kind of like, and in a way, it's kind of similar to another scene that I'm going to talk about next, which I'll get into, but I don't know, it's just like a really, really effective jump scare. You don't need this whole build up. It's just like, ooh, creepy hallway, ah, cat, flying in. That's dumb. Because like I said, everyone's going to jump. That's easy to do. But this was a classy jump scare. I mean, thing is, she said, I saw her face, and then they cut to like her memory of like of Katie, and she's just like, she's hunched up in the closet, and like her face is all distorted and gray, and it's just like, oh my God, it's so awful. And it only stays on the screen for like a couple of seconds, but holy shit, did that make a massive fucking impact on me. That was like fucking horrifying. It was just like, yeah, it was just like a regular conversation, and then bam, that was just like one of the most ghastly like visuals ever put to film. I mean, so great. That was just great. And like I said, I don't want to say it was great because it fucking fucked me up and it stressed me out for a long time afterward. I think this is one of the more recent movies, and it's not that recent. It's like 20 years old, but it's one of the few that I can think of that actually like did kind of give me nightmares for a little while after seeing it, and that was absolutely like the creepiest scene for me, big time. So where the fuck do I even start with this fucking movie? So, Hereditary, directed by Ari Aster from 2018, is, this is a fucking masterpiece. You guys, any of you that know, that have been around here for any long time, you know I fucking love this movie. But I didn't know like a huge amount about it like before I went to see it in 2018, because you had to think like Ari Aster was not like a big name. At this point, this was kind of like his first big movie, so I didn't really know what to expect. I was just like, oh, horror movie, okay, I'm down. So we go and see it. So when we went to see it, it took me completely by surprise. When I went to see it in the theater, I just sat there watching it, and I mean, really from early on in the film, like my stomach was just like curdling, like from dread, like just the whole entire goddamn time. It's like, look, I love horror movies, you guys know, but it's very, very rare that one actually scares me. I'm not saying that to be a badass or anything like that, but it's just that I've seen so many of them that a lot of the tricks that they do don't really work on me anymore because I've seen them done so many times and usually done badly. I also write horror myself, so I'm pretty familiar with like the methods that you would use to like elicit certain emotions out of the reader or the viewer or what have you. So it's really, really hard to scare me, but I'm always kind of like looking for that though, you know what I mean? Hereditary though was just a different beast altogether. I don't think that I've been that traumatized by a horror movie since I was a kid. Like, probably since the first time that I saw The Shining, which that's kind of, because that fucked me up too, like when I was a little kid, the first time I saw that. But this one, this one did a number on me, I gotta say. And I gotta say too that like I simultaneously loved and hated Ari Aster like in equal measure for making me feel that way. And for, again, giving me nightmares. This gave me way more nightmares than The Ring did. I mean, The Ring gave me nightmares for a couple nights. I think this one gave me nightmares for like 3 or 4 weeks, like afterward. Like not every night, but, you know, recurring. I saw a review of this movie. I can't remember where it was published, but someone called it emotional terrorism. And that actually like resonated with me pretty hard because this movie, it made me so anxious like during its entire running time. And even though like after I saw it the first time, I was like, oh shit, what if that was fucked up, Jesus Christ. But I desperately wanted to see it again because I knew that there were so many subtleties and details and stuff that I missed, but I put it off for more than 2 fucking years because just thinking about sitting through it again gave me heart palpitations. And I'm like not even joking about that. And I mean, really, I can't think of higher praise for a horror movie than that. It's like, that was the most amazing, like scariest film that I've ever seen. And I don't ever want to fucking watch it again. I did want to watch it again, but I was scared too. You know, I'm going to say that. I'm not ashamed to admit it. So I think most people reading this are probably acquainted with what Hereditary is about. But if you aren't, it's basically the story of this kind of dysfunctional family, the Grahams, who are dealing with the recent loss of the maternal grandmother, like the mom Annie, that's her mom. And it turns out that grandma may have had some secrets pertaining to perhaps an evil witch coven that she was involved with. So said members of this coven seemingly begin to infiltrate the lives of the Graham family without them being entirely aware of it, leading to some pretty fucked up, like, demonic antics that I'll let people who haven't seen the movie discover for themselves. So, I mean, it sounds like a pretty simple premise, honestly, one that's been done before, but really it's the execution of said premise that immediately like rocketed Hereditary into my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time, like within minutes of seeing it. You know what I'm saying? I was just like, that was one of the best horror movies ever. I've just seen it. But yeah, I mean, it's that fucking good. Now, I will note though that there do seem to be 2 camps and never shall they meet, like surrounding this movie. One camp containing people who thought, this movie was laughable and or not scary, or didn't really get it, like weren't really paying attention, because there's like a lot of stuff like going on beneath the surface of this movie. This is definitely one that you need to see like a bunch of times, because a lot of stuff is like really subtle and not pointed out that, you know, kind of contributes to the whole thing. So yeah, there was that. And then, you know, there were also people that seemed like they didn't really want to get completely invested on the characters. They thought the characters were unlikable. So it didn't really have any kind of take any emotional toll on them, because they didn't really let themselves like get involved in the story to any great degree. So there's that camp of people. And then there's the other camp of people like me who got completely invested in all the characters and their dynamic and felt almost overwhelmingly apprehensive, like pretty much from the first frame, kept thinking about scenes from the fucking movie every time I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and again was too chicken shit to watch it a second time, even though I really wanted to. I did eventually like rewatch it, and it stressed me out less the second time, but not that much less. And that's only because I knew what was coming at this point. Now, this is another movie where I can't just pick one scene that fucked me up, because there were so many. And the thing about Hereditary is that the horror of it is really like pervasive. Even the scenes that don't appear scary on the surface, like, are still really unsettling when the whole thing is kind of taken in aggregate. I mean, of course, the big showstopper sequence, the one that everybody talks about, is the one where Charlie gets beheaded by the pole. Though I think the scariest thing about that, other than imagining that happening to you or someone in the car with you, which I can't even like, that'd be fucking horrible, was seeing all the reactions of the characters like after it happened, like her brother Peter, who was driving the car, just going into shock and like blanking out and just like driving home like in a fucking daze. That was fucking horrifying. You know, her mom Annie just like wailing in grief in a way that just kind of like, oh god, it was horrifying. Oh, and by the way, holy shit, why didn't Toni Collette get an Oscar for this again? Who knows? I don't know. Anyway. Oh, and then, you know, as if that whole thing wasn't bad enough, there was that brutal fucking smash cut, like, to the girl's fucked up, like, severed head laying there on the road, like, getting eaten by ants and shit like that, which meant I saw that, and that legit made me want to get up and, like, nope out the theater. I'm just like, nope, we're not doing this. Not doing this. Nope, I don't like it. Not one bit. But I'm glad I stayed, because, like I said, it's an amazing movie, but man, I did not like the way it made me feel. Not at all. But so that jump scare, that was the other one that I was referring to when I was talking about the one from The Ring, where they kind of like smash cut from the two women talking in the kitchen to bam, like here's this fucked up looking like woman, like, or girl, like in the closet, like after Samara got done with her. That was kind of like the same thing. You weren't expecting, it was kind of like a jump scare, but there wasn't like a big musical sting or anything like that. It just smash cut to this really fucked up image, and it just like pushed it right in your face, and it was just like really, like, a lot of people, I think when we saw it in the theater when it was pretty full, like you could hear it, but it just gasped, you know what I mean, because you weren't expecting it. But you know, that wasn't the only thing though. Then there were all the other scenes. When I was thinking about doing this and like taking down notes and everything like that, there were so many, I just kept writing scenes down from this movie that like fucking stressed me out. I mean, there was like Peter in school like slamming his own head against the desk, like his arm going all fucked up, and then him looking at his reflection and his reflection smiling and he's not. Ugh, like that was fucking freaky. The dream that Annie has about like seeing Peter's face all covered with ants and then walking up to realize that she's been sleepwalking and she's standing over him about to set him on fire. It's just kind of like, oh, Peter like sitting on the bed like in the room and it's all dark, and then you watching the movie, you slowly realize that Annie is actually perched up in the corner of the room, like up near the ceiling, like in the shadows, like you can't see her at first, but then she's kind of like running across the fucking Jesus Christ. So there's that, and then there was the scene of like Annie floating in the air, sawing her own head off, like with the piano wire, you know, and you know, there was also the scene of like Annie banging her head like against the top of like the attic door, like really fast, like after she gets possessed, like that shot of like the creepy naked guy just hanging out in the darkened doorway, like in the living room in the background, and absolutely nobody comments on it or notices. It's just kind of there, you know what I mean? It's just shit like that. So there's just like tons and tons of moments in this movie like that. And the one that actually gave me the most sleepless nights wasn't even one of those. It's the one where Peter wakes up from a dream after, I think, he hears like that clicking noise that Charlie always made with her mouth, like when she was alive. And he looks over in the corner of his room and he doesn't see anything at first, but then it looks like Charlie is standing there. Like it's like, oh, it's Charlie's ghost or whatever. And he's just like, oh shit, like Charlie's ghost is standing there. I'm like, oh, that's pretty creepy. And then her fucking head like tips forward and falls off, and I was just kind of like, oh man, I did not like that. I mean, beheading has always like freaked me out anyway, so that moment really got me, especially because it was kind of unexpected and it was sort of low key, like, and I wasn't really like, I was like, oh creepy, her ghost is standing over there, but I absolutely did not expect for her fucking head just to silently fall off like that. Is like, I don't, just thinking about it. But that was the scene that I would think about, like when I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I'd be like, I don't really want to get out of bed right now. I don't want to walk down the like dark hallway to go to the bathroom. What if I see her in the corner, her head falls off? It's like, I'll shit myself. But yeah, I don't know why that one bothered me more than any of those, because they all did bother me. I'm not saying that, but that one really like bothered me a lot. So anyway, I've gone on and on. Hopefully you enjoyed this lengthy examination of some of my favorite scary scenes. I certainly enjoyed putting this together. And as I said, I'll probably do a revisit one of these days to cover the million or so other scenes that I didn't talk about today. So hopefully you guys will be down for that one. I can't promise anything, like I said, but I'm sure I'll probably do one eventually. So thanks as always for dropping by the salon and hanging out with me today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and pop on over to scaresalon.com. I've got lots more written content over there, like book and movie reviews and stuff like that. It's all kind of fun stuff that you can read, and that'll do it for this installment. I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.
And now is acknowledged the presence of the Red Death.